Hyphae, and welcome back to my channel. Welcome back to Hyphae World. This is Koro, my finger puppet. Okay? Today we are continuing the carbon matter series. Yes, super excited. So, just to roll it back a little bit, I am an environmental scientist and an artist exploring the science and art nexus on my channel. And this series that I'm doing right now is called Carbon Matter, and it is all about biochar. In case you missed the first episode, what is biochar? Biochar is any organic matter that goes through a thermochemical process. So it goes through a transformation by heat in the lack of oxygen. And that helps the organic matter to transform into a more stable carbon product that can be used, that can be treated with nutrients and used as a soil amendment. Although there are other applications that we're going to explore. That's a little intro about biochar. And today we are going to get deeper into biochar feedstocks. So, what is a biochar feedstock? It's anything that you're using to make biochar. And the reason why I want to get into it is because the feedstock, whether it be wood or corn husks, for example, those different feedstocks are going to give you a very different end product. Even somebody on the first video suggested, oh, can I use my mushroom growing substrate as a feedstock? Yes, that's a fantastic idea. This is a little bit of what we're going to explore in the feedstocks. So, first, you have your physical properties. That's everything from the particle size to the density of your feedstock and the moisture content. Those are really important also to consider. Then, chemically, what you want to consider is the lignin content. Now, what is lignin? Lignin is a complex organic polymer that binds cellulose and hemicellulose fibers together in the plant cell walls, providing structural rigidity, waterproofing, and decay resistance. For example, a tree bark. Tree bark is gonna, on average, have a bit higher of the lignin than, for example, something like straw or a leaf. So leaves, they will break down a lot more easily. Then we have the nutrients. So what are going to be the nutrients of that feedstock just on its own before it hits the heat? Okay, we also have our volatile matter. So volatile matter and compounds are going to burn off at a certain temperature. So volatile compounds easily turn into a gas. So it's the reason why, a flower smells nice or a perfume smells nice. And they're almost like biological signals. The volatile matter is going to be something that, depending on what the feedstock is, the temperature that you end up creating your biochar at, you'll want to take note of getting to a high enough temperature, considering things like volatile matter and lignin content. So that's more on the chemistry side, which we'll get deeper into. Another thing that you want to consider from the feedstocks are heavy metals and toxins. So, are you trying to make biochar from a sunflower, which typically takes up heavy metals in the soil environment? You will want to know about that for your feedstock, because if you're applying it directly back onto the soil, you're going to want to know the effects of that. So, I would say that that's something that ideally you would want to avoid. And then also, under contamination, there are other organic pollutants that you want to consider. And then the last factor that I'm going to mention here is sustainability. So, like, ideally, you want to use biochar production as something that is helping your waste stream be more circular. So, looking for things that are already a waste stream. For example, in a workshop that I did at a small farm in the Bronx, they were using a lot of their twigs and things that was coming from pruning their trees. So that wasn't something like, oh, okay, I'm cutting down a tree and cutting up all this wood just to make biochar. There's a bit of a difference there, and you want to make sure that you're not degrading natural ecosystems with this goal of making the biochar. So there is a diversity of feedstocks that you can explore. A few I've mentioned already. So there is crop residue, this is a rambutan, I believe. And so that rambutan shell and like the outer part of it, that can be utilized if there is a large amount coming from local trees. Then you have something I've also mentioned, woody biomass. You have animal manure, which I talked a bit about in the last video. I have a bit of experience making biochar from animal manure. Then you also have sewage sludge. This one gets a little more seedy, but I do know I've spoken to at one point somebody that is in the Northeast, and they were transporting sewage sludge from New York City up to the Northeast to be able to transform it into biochar. I know that there's a lot of like safety in that to consider. Then there's also food waste. So the food scraps that we typically know can go into something like compost, that is still an option, of course, but then you can also make it into biochar. Starting with the physical properties, the particle size. This is something that when I was studying biochar in my master's, I was looking at, because I would take these clumps of manure. I was working with horse manure. I would take these clumps of horse manure, and I actually decided, okay, I want to ground it up because I was interested in making more of a fine biochar just due to the system that I was working with. I was working with pretty small boats of things that were going into my heating system. So I wanted to make it quite small. So as you can see here, depending on your application goal, you have different sizes that you can work with. So starting at the top, if your goal is to improve your soil structure, then you're going to want to go with a bit more coarse size. If you wanted to use your biochar for a mulch layer, then you also want to go with something coarse. For something like water retention, improving the amount of water that your soil can hold, you're going to want a medium to fine. And when it gets to something like contaminant sorption, you want to get even more fine, because as that particle size decreases, the surface area of the particle increases. Like the outside on the particle of the biochar, there are all these chemical reactions that are happening, absorption and different things like that. So between the chemical and physical properties, to optimize for something like contaminant sorption, you want a more fine particle. Biochar should have this like snap to it after it's finished. If it's completely transformed, then you should be able to like quite easily crush it also after it's transformed. But if it's possible, it's something that you can do before. So just to keep in mind. So physical properties in terms of moisture before you're going in and making the biochar. It's ideal to have a moisture content below 15%, maybe 8 to 12%. And low moisture matters because it will improve the energy efficiency of conversion. So we'll get into some of those conversion methods. Low moisture will help with that. It enhances the carbon conversion, reduces emissions, and increases the final biochar quality. We have a couple different ways of going about drying it, whether that is sun and air drying or utilizing fans to dry it. There are also like low heat ovens that I've used in the past. When you first collect the feedstock, you can actually weigh it. And then after you dry it, say in the sun or in some fans, or you're hang drying it for a bit, you can weigh that biomass before and after, do a simple calculation, which can help you to determine what the moisture content is. I keep mentioning these production methods. Let's get a little deeper into it. We have our biomass feedstock, and then we are putting it into our pyrolysis reactor. So with pyrolysis, you're getting those higher temperatures, 300 to 1000 degrees Celsius, which translates to about 575 to 1800 degrees Fahrenheit. So this is very hot. The typical temperature of a fire is going to be between 400 and 1200 C. It can provide those temperatures that you're looking for. And like I said, this is going to be an oxygen limited environment. Here's another thing about production methods, and this is something that I also studied closely when I was producing biochar in the lab. Through pyrolysis, you're going to get a solid, liquid, and a gas. And all three are actually going to be usable. So you have the biochar, that's your solid, right? You have your bio oil. There's going to be oil residues that come out of this. And then you also have a gas that is released. In an ideal world, the system that you're working with is able to collect that bio oil, collect that gas, and collect the solid all separately, because you can use, as you can see here, you can use each of those parts for continued energy production, chemical extraction, generation of power and heat. We can utilize everything, and that's ideally what you want to do. Okay, so there's something that I want to clarify before we get more detailed into the production methods and some of the finer details of producing biochar. There are different kinds of pyrolysis. I am mainly going to focus on slow pyrolysis because it's shown that you've been able to get a higher output of the solid material. Different methods have been shown to have different yields of that solid versus the liquid versus the gas. And so we're going to focus on slow pyrolysis. Here is just a visual to help understand what is going on inside of the furnace when the biochar is being created. So there is a time period when everything is coming up to the temperature that the biochar is going to be created at. And so there's a period of rising temperature, and then there is a residence period. So there's a residence time and temperature that the biochar is going to stay at when it's really going to be transforming. So then it comes down. When I get more detailed into these production methods, just keep in mind this is the temperature curve that we are looking at and applying to our feedstock material. So now we're going to get a bit deeper into the different technique examples. So here you can see this chart is organized from low tech, medium tech to high tech, and it shows in words, how it works, what are the positives and what are the potential drawbacks. So on the low tech, we have something like an earthen pit method or a trench pit or traditional mound kilns. As it says here, the biomass is burned in a pit or mound with limited oxygen by covering with soil, ash, or dirt. You can cover it with a number of other things. It's just really to keep the oxygen out. And here's another example of what an earthen pit or a mound kiln looks like. So it's simple, cheap. You don't have a lot of overhead to invest in your system, and it's good for rural or off-grid areas. As far as the drawbacks for this, it is low, it can be low efficiency as compared to your very tailored systems. It can be harder to control. You will have more smoke and emissions and have a more inconsistent biochar quality. It just depends on your goals. In the next video, I will share some of the applications that I've explored, and I've tried this method before and it did what it needed to do. It really depends highly on your situation. Now, for a medium tech, you have things like 55-gallon drum kilns, double barrel type of kilns. Here's what some of those look like. They are partially enclosed metal systems with limited airflow and better insulation to improve pyrolysis. These are pretty affordable and portable. They are cleaner than pits. They give you a more consistent quality, and they can be used also for heating and cooking. The drawbacks is these are still very manual processes. They only have moderate efficiency. The batch sizes can tend to be limited, and the temperature control is still not all the way exactly dialed in. This is a great application for somebody like a small farm or a small operation that has the space to be able to build and utilize this, but is not making biochar necessarily at huge quantities with great turnover. Yeah, I also just want to mention it's called a Kontiki kiln. There are also demo versions of this. These are quite mobile. I liked this. I liked using it. It definitely was, producing still some of that smoke that you want to look out for. So that is more of the medium tech. With the higher tech, you have continuous pyrolysis reactors. You have fast or slow pyrolysis systems and controlled biochar furnaces. So these are very highly engineered systems that control the temperature, oxygen, and time for the optimized biochar yield and quality. So I was working with one of these systems at actually a very small scale, high tech. I was able to control the temperatures, ensure that it was giving a consistent temperature around to the biochar, control the fact that there was no oxygen there, and I knew exactly for how much time it was going to be running. Batch versus continuous, that's like, okay, I'm going to process all this right now, or I'm going to continuously run this system as long as we're getting input. You're getting to like commercial type of operations or like larger scale projects. These systems can be very big. I will show a couple. One of the ones, the Dragon. So that was a system that they invested in Puerto Rico. It's quite a large system, and it's continuous in the fact that there is a belt that's moving inside the system, and the heat is being applied to it. It has a self-quenching part to it as well. So that means when the biochar is coming off of the heat, it gets quenched with water. That water immediately brings it back down to the temperature. That water is going to be quite alkaline, and you can use it for other fitting applications. With this higher tech, okay, some of the positives, we have higher efficiency and yields, good yields. You can control more of the yields. Precise control over the carbon content and porosity. So this is like, again, highly designed. You have a bit more predictability of what you're going to get from these systems. These systems also have those co-product recoveries. So like I was mentioning with the bio oils and the gas called syngas that comes out of the biochar production, you're able to actually recover that. And it is scalable, so it can be scaled up well. The drawbacks, depending on your situation, is it is expensive, it requires skilled operation, it needs electricity and fuel, and it is higher maintenance. So these are all things that can be worked with. If you really want to invest in a biochar system, those drawbacks are going to be things that, you can have people operating it, you can have people maintaining it. I think that we should have a high-tech system that feeds a region. Like all the people in a region can collect certain biomass, what waste streams are existing there, or what other feedstock is readily available, and that system can be utilized locally. But I think that it's a great like collective investment to make, to have this as an option. Here's also another example of a mobile high tech, which is a skid mounted pyrolysis system. And so this can process 2 tons per day of biomass. And here are some examples from Continued Tiki. This is from High Plains Biochar that's in the Midwest.
We've been making somewhere in the neighborhood of about 10 gallons per hour of biochar. Guys, we're running really hot right now. We're actually up over 800 C. Okay, guys, we've been running for about 2 hours now. We've shut down, the fire's up, cooling down. We're back down to 439. Now we're gonna go ahead and unload. So we've got our bin vibrator set on, and we're going to go ahead and kick our auger on, which will start moving the biochar out the chute, and then we're going to go ahead and kick our pump on. So here we go. Kind of wrapping up our unloading. Still got a few more pieces coming out, but just wanted to give you guys an idea how this comes out. It's quench, and it's because we use a grate, we've got much smaller pieces that are a lot more usable than some of the other big chunks that would come out of a Kontiki that typically aren't burned all the way. So we've made just under 20 gallons, between 15 and 20 gallons of biochar here. We've been draining for almost 2 hours today. So it kind of gives you an idea about how much biochar this makes. But
so I really like that they put on their website, for example, like how much biochar could be created per day, per year with their different systems and what feedstocks are going to be working well. Different systems are going to be optimized for different things. And I would say, like, if you're considering a biochar system, you really want to look at those readily available feedstocks of what you would make, because not everybody is going to need a high tech system. Some people are just in their gardens and they want to process their own waste and they might want to use something like the Kontiki, some like low tech or medium tech. You're rural, you don't even need to do all that. So I will link a bunch of things down below, including some of my sources that I use, as well as other videos that you could watch that can be a bit more informative to the pyrolysis process. So that is an introduction to feedstocks, the differences that you can find in your feedstocks, and some production methods. In the next video, I'm going to talk about some of my personal experience of low tech methods that I've practiced, medium tech methods that I've been a part of in a workshop, as well as a higher tech method that I documented, also some other documented cases. So super excited to get into that. Thank you guys for tuning in and bearing with some of the more technical information when it comes to chemistry and thinking about the physical and chemical aspects of the biochar in the soil. See you for the next video. Thank you. Bye.